Are you struggling to find a pathology lab that truly understands your needs? Look no further than Baco Diagnostics. With customized services for today's podiatric clinician, Baco Diagnostics continues their commitment to educational initiatives that propel the profession forward. Baco Diagnostics, more than just a pathology lab, they're your professional partner for podiatric pathology and therapeutics, helping podiatric physicians keep America on its feet.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Dean's Chat, where we discuss all things podiatric medicine. My name is Dr. Jeffrey Jensen. I'm the Dean at the Arizona College of Podiatric Medicine and the host for the Dean's Chat podcast. Once again, I'm with my co-host, Dr. Johanna Richey. Hello, Joe.
Hey, Jeff. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How you surviving the weather out there?
Oh, it's, another day in paradise. It's 109 right now.
There you go. Kind of like in the Valley from where our guest is from, Dr. Kevin Kirby from Sacramento, California.
How are you guys doing? Thanks for having me on. It's a real pleasure to talk and see you guys again.
Well, thank you, Kevin. We do go with first names. So if Kevin, Joe, and Jeff's all right with you, we'll roll with that.
All right, let's do it.
So Kevin, you and I have been talking about getting this podcast together for almost a year now. So I'm so excited to have you on. You are one of the leading figures in biomechanics and sports medicine, and we want to dive into your career as much as possible. Joe, do you mind doing a little bit of a formal introduction, and then we'll get into it?
Yeah, no, I would love that. Kevin, thank you so much for taking the time today to come talk with us about your experience and share all of the different things that I know we're going to delve into. To do a brief introduction, because your career is remarkable and your CV is remarkable. So we'll just do a quick intro, and then we'll kind of dive into a couple of little areas for a deeper investigation. But Dr. Kevin Kirby grew up in Sacramento. You went to high school there and then went on to do your undergraduate degree at UC Davis. You went to the California College of Podiatric Medicine in San Francisco, and then did your surgical residency with the Palo Alto VA in Northern California. You went on to do a Biomechanics Fellowship with the California College of Podiatric Medicine and also got your master's degree at the same time. And then now you've been in private practice since that time, but continuing to be a thought leader in biomechanics and sports medicine, an innovator in a lot of areas, again, that we'll hopefully be able to touch into some of those, but also an incredibly accomplished athlete in and of itself. If I'm reading this correctly, you completed a marathon in 2 hours and 28 minutes. Is that correct?
I was 1980. Yep.
That is incredible.
Between my freshman and sophomore year at CCPM. Yeah.
So we'll jump in a little bit. I know I'm going to throw the ball back to you, Jeff, but I first met you in person working with because you are an adjunct professor for the California School of Podiatric Medicine with Samuel Merritt University. And so I had the opportunity to learn from you. But even prior to that, when I was a student in biomechanics and I was trudging through trying to figure out these complex concepts, your work was actually something that helped me dig through the weeds and make more sense out of it. Your ability to take complex mechanics and simplify it through great diagrams and more simplistic language than some of the early biomechanists, I so appreciated. So maybe if you could start and give us a little bit of the experiences that you've had in watching the evolution of biomechanics and what kind of the history is.
Yeah, I think a little bit of background about myself so you can understand where I come from. I was, competitive distance runner through high school and college, and had orthotics made for me back in UC Davis when I was 19. So I got the exposure to podiatry. I liked the sports medicine because of my athletic background and thought, oh, podiatry, that's a good thing. But I also was an animal physiology major, was, interested in exercise physiology, but I always had a good physics background because I had physics both in high school, a really good course in high school and in college. So when I got to CCPM and, we had a really smart class, Jeff Christensen, Steve Palladino, John Drini, all these guys. We just had this remarkable class. really started to say, okay, I'm here. I want to learn as much as I can about sports medicine. I want to learn as much as I can about biomechanics because that's what I want to do. I want to be a specialist in that. Even though there wasn't a specialty available, that was what I did. So I started working with Dr. John Weed, who was giving us a lecture. I did some work with him, building a workbook with him, and Kirk Kepsel, who was our valedictorian, and studied hard, really trying to ask a lot of questions about things that didn't make sense to me. And then once I got to my fourth year and I got accepted to be a resident at the VA at Palo Alto, it was more of a surgery year, but I was still keeping my ideas available for biomechanics, trying to understand it, but with a focus on the surgery and treating diabetics at the time. So when I got accepted as a fellow, that was the big moment for me because, Ron Velmassi he was our chairman. So he was my boss. We had Chris Smith, Jack Morris started that same time, Lester Jones, Rich Blake was my resident when I was a student, so I had influence from him. John Weed and John Morzalek, who passed away soon after I left. But we just had this group of really smart people, and I think the thing was I had that full year to really start thinking about and question things. And then when I started to question things, I sometimes wasn't getting an answer that made sense from a physics standpoint. And I was doing a lot of outside reading. I'd go up to we had the library then. It was, this is prior to the internet. So I would go up to the library and I would copy articles. I'd try to find articles relating to biomechanics and some of the classics like from Hicks and Manter. I would read those articles. And during my fellowship, one of the things I think really helped was I was forced to teach the students. And I had to come up with a way to explain things that made sense to me and hopefully would make sense to them also. And we would have journal clubs every once a week. We'd have journal clubs. I'd copy an article I was interested in, hand it to all the students, and they'd have to show up an hour early so we could discuss that. And I think me being forced to teach at an early age, I was only 20, I would have been like 27, 28 years old at the time. I was really being forced to try to put the knowledge in a package that I could teach the students without being confusing and violating the physics principles I'd learned in high school and college. And around the time that I was just starting my Biomechanics Fellowship, so this would have been from July 1st of 84 to June 30th of 85, John Weed was coming in to teach once a week. And, he was such a resource. I basically would find him after he lectured in the hallway, and I'd have a list of like 5 or 10 questions for him. And I think after a while he tried to avoid me. But he was great. Him and Ron Velmassi were just so good. They were very patient with me because I was just one of those. I was like this sponge, wanting to sponge all this information from these guys who had so much more experience than I did. And I remember one of the key moments, I think, during my fellowship that really changed the trajectory of my career was, and I've told this story before in some of my lectures and my newsletters, is that John Weed had mentioned that he would sometimes alter his orthotic prescriptions to make deep heel cups, longer rear foot posts, different materials for people that pronated more. And I said, well, I understand that, but what criteria do you use to understand which feet need that correction and which don't? And he said, oh, well, one thing I do is I push on the bottom of the heel of my thumb. And if I push in the middle of the heel and they supinate, then they probably won't need it. But if I have to push very medial on the heel, in order to get the foot to supinate, then I assume that's, going to require I don't remember if he said anything about a subtalar joint axis or what he said, but I had, all the time I had worked with him, he had never taught me this. So this was in the early in the first half of my Biomechanics Fellowship at CCPM. So I went right out, and I think I grabbed 2 or 3 podiatry students and pushed on their heels, and then I said, okay, well, what's going to happen now if I push farther forward? And I started marking the areas where they didn't rotate. I could find the pronation side of the foot, supination side of the foot. I started marking that, and it really got me to thinking about the correlation to this subtalar joint axis location to function, because what we saw was something that had not been taught. I had gone another story, just to pull everything together. At the same time, I would spend a week at Kaiser Vallejo. And over there, instead of having all these biomechanics professors being able to provide me with information, I was the biomechanics guy for the whole clinic. So I was doing orthotics. The surgeons who worked there would come and ask me questions about biomechanics. And, so I was at an early age, I was having to be the man responsible for a fairly large orthotic clinic at Kaiser Vallejo. And during that time, I was noticing that many of the measurements that I had been taught to take, and I was teaching students at the time regarding heel bisections and subtalar joint range of motion and malleolar torsion and ankle joint dorsiflexion, et cetera, et cetera. The root measurements that were taught were not correlating to the way the foot functioned. And for example, if we had a foot that was asymmetrical, the pronating more on one foot than the other, I do the measurements, and there really wasn't any difference. And I said, well, trying to do my thinking cap here, I was saying, now, if these measurements could predict which feet were more pronated or not, then that would be useful. But why am I not getting any difference? If these measurements are really important to take, you would think they'd be able to predict function, which they were not able to in a lot of cases. The forefoot or rear foot may have been within 1 or 2 degrees of each other, left foot to right foot, which meant that that was in my range of error for measurement. So from that point on, I started to use this subtalar joint axis. It took me probably about a month or 2 to get the technique down to where I could reproduce it. And I started noticing that these feet that were asymmetrical had a different subtalar joint axis location. And I said, wow, that's really something. I think, and it was all because of that discussion outside the biomechanics lab with John Weed one day when he was, I had gotten the technique together. And then from there, it's like the floodgates opened. It was like, okay, subtalar joint axis location, heel, ground reaction force underneath the plantar heel is going to cause a supination moment on a normal foot. Ground reaction force under the lateral forefoot is going to cause a pronation moment. As that axis shifts medially laterally, it's going to change the magnitudes of pronation, supination moments, just like the seesaw type diagram I've done for many years. And, just really opened up my ability to understand how the variations between not only left and right feet of the same individual, but between one person and another. So that was, I think, from that moment on, I really was starting to, I think, understand the foot function, the lower extremity function from a physics standpoint. And I think that's really been critical for me to try to, go through. And it was difficult because I was really I was here going back to the school, talking to my professors about this, John Weed and Ronald O'Mash and Chris Smith. And, they were, kind of tolerating me. I was just a young whippersnapper that was in my fellowship. And I was real excited, and they were, not too excited because it wasn't their idea, I guess. And, anyway, so the bottom line was that I was excited. I thought I was onto something that was very significant. And and I taught it to the students, and the students seemed to grasp the ideas. But really being forced as a young resident to teach students biomechanics in a fashion that was using basic physics concepts was always my goal, because I figured if I could teach basic high school physics principles to the podiatry students, and I was doing something useful for them and maybe for myself also.
Kevin, I have a question for you. When you were a fellow and you started having all this enlightenment, right? What was it like? Did you go home? Did you just sit down with a pad of paper and start writing things down and try to capture it and organize it? And then that went on and on and on until you actually formulated?
I'll tell you the story that I've told many times. I was at Kaiser Vallejo one day, and it was a long drive. I'm from San Francisco. We lived, in the Richmond district. From the Richmond district to Kaiser Vallejo was about an hour's drive, and I'd be coming home in the evening after, and I remember it was dark, and I was driving home, and mulling through my head this idea that, okay, we have this axis location, and I'm thinking about heel bisections, and I'm thinking about the calcaneal tubercle, where it is, because at the same time I was doing a radiographic study that eventually got published, and Eric Fuller was one of my students in the study on this anterior axial X-ray view I invented. Anyway, so I was really interested in this idea that the medial calcaneal tubercle was the prime weight-bearing area of the plantar calcaneus. And so I remember driving home. It was one evening. It was like probably halfway there, and all of a sudden, it's like I got this bright idea. I guess epiphany they would call it, where I'm thinking, okay, medial calcaneal tubercle has to be medial to the axis, and it creates a supination force. It has to be balanced out by a pronation force in order to get equilibrium, and to allow the two moments to cancel out each other so you can have a stable foot. And then once I finally, and it seems so simple now, but you understand I was the only one working on this at the time, and I was a resident. And when I started thinking of things that way, everything kind of fell into place. I was able to, from that point on, understand more. I thought how a pronated foot can have difficulties trying to supinate it, how a more supinated foot could be more difficult to pronate with an orthotic, and that sort of thing. So that was a drive home from Kaiser Vallejo one evening, and I have a quote from Einstein on my wall. And he talks about the years of searching in the dark for truth that one feels but cannot express. That's basically what it was. I felt there was something there, but until I had that drive from Vallejo one day, I couldn't put it into words. And after that, yes, I would sit and I would do diagrams, and I was always a good artist. So I started to do, just basic diagrams of different types, and then I go teach it to the students. And then I think about some more, and that's how I learned a lot just by doing those diagrams. I was always had a skeleton. Here's my still see my skeleton here that I got as a podiatry student.
Oh,
Real human bones, and I would go through the subtalar joint, and I would do all that sort of stuff. And but I'd also do a lot of drawings, and with the forces coming through the foot and trying to understand. And I think that really helped me also, because it was a visual of three, because biomechanics is such a three-dimensional subject that I really needed to put it into a model, kind of a modeling type thing. So I modeled the foot to its basics so I could get through that level of knowledge onto the next level, so I could understand how orthotics worked and why pronated feet had certain biomechanical characteristics about them versus more supinated feet, and muscle function and gait function and all that. So yeah, it's been quite a journey.
It kind of reminds me of the artists that have this song in their head and they're driving home from wherever and they got to get home so they can hum it into a tape recorder so they don't forget it. You know?
Yeah, it was really more that I had been mulling over these problems, because I was having problems. My problems were I didn't have anyone to really who was at my level at that time and was really interested in trying to understand how significant the subtalar axis location was. And so I was basically having to do this all on my own, which was tough, but it really made me grow in the sense that and once I started understanding that drive home from Vallejo, then I started doing a lot of writing things down. And then I eventually, published that first paper on the subtotal axis location. That was only a few years after I got on my fellowship. The thinking for that really started when I was still toward the end of my biomechanics fellowship in like early 1985.
Wow, this
I
is
was
so
just a
fun.
youngster.
This is so fun. Joe, mind if I ask another question?
No, go for it.
All right. So when I think back to those days, because Kevin, I went to the CCPM in 1987 for many of the same reasons you did. I was a runner. I'd run marathons. I'd done some climbing. And biomechanics and sports medicine fascinated me. And I had Harry Levac's book, The Running Foot Doctor, right?
Right.
No, it was Subotnick's. It was Subotnick's book.
Yeah,
And then
he was a running foot doctor.
Yep, and then
Harry Levac was the foot book.
There you go. And so I thought I was coming into the mecca of all great things running in sports medicine. And I could make an argument that the Podiatric or Biomechanics Sports Medicine Hall of Fame is centered right in San Francisco because what a tremendous group of docs. I mean, I think back and we had Jack Morris and Chris Smith and Paul Scheer and Eric Fuller was teaching. Dr. Valmassi, I mean, your shadow was there, even though you weren't there. What do you think about that? I mean, those are a special time, especially starting with Dr. Weed.
We all know that early detection is the single most important determination in improving patient outcomes. Baco Diagnostics remains committed to supporting you in your role as the first line of defense in the diagnosis of conditions of the lower extremity. Baco Diagnostics, helping podiatric physicians keep America on its feet.
Yeah, it's since I got out of there. Well, so what had happened? I was, struggling financially in the first years of practice, and I had finished my fellowship. I started to work for an orthopedic group, but it was slow. I was seeing like 3 to 5 patients a day my first year, and it was because I was, coming back home to Sacramento, but still I was looking for other ways to support my wife and my son, and later on my other son who's now 36. My older son is 41. So anyway, I asked Ron Belmassi, I said, can I come into the clinic? So I would drive in once a month and do a clinic on Saturdays. And then I would also teach a few classes. And I was teaching I think we did shoe biomechanics class, and I did a class on the history of shoes and some other classes. But, that would get $100 for a lecture or something like that. And, which was, for me, that was a lot of money back then. So that was really helpful to not only be able to teach and stay active in the biomechanics, but also to help me financially being able to go back to school. And so when we went back to school and did those Saturday clinics, I mean, you could have been, I don't know if you were probably one of the students. I can't remember who else. I remember, you said Steve Bardis and you were classmates. Yeah, that group. Yeah, so we'd go in there and we'd watch people walk. We had a slow motion black and white video camera. We would do all sorts of stuff. We'd put felt into their shoes. We'd put different orthotics in, see if we tell the difference between how they walked.
Tissue
Anything
paper.
we could do, partly because I was interested, trying to make the students be interested also in what I was interested in. So it was never really work for me. It was more play. I mean, I always had the science mind, and I liked research, and just always as a kid I was the kid that's taking apart a radio, see that didn't work, and see if I make it work again. And I was always taking things apart. So I was just had that mind where I was, okay, I want to know how this works. A foot, I want to know how it works and how does it respond, and how does the body respond to different variables, putting a medial heel wedge, putting a lateral forefoot wedge, putting a heel lift in, how do shoes. And so I just had that inquisitive mind, and I was trying to take that knowledge that I had gained and transfer it to the students I was teaching.
That's incredible. Does this bring back a lot of memories of biomechanics, Joe?
Oh, so the students know a little bit, but I can mirror so much of what you're discussing, Kevin, about your student. Something's not making sense. So you're trying to ask the right questions, but you kind of don't know what to ask. But like in your head, you know that what you're hearing doesn't make sense to you. And actually, my biomechanics professor had mentioned, why don't you check out Kevin Kirby's work? And that was probably the best thing that she could have done to help me, because I was just really struggling. And it wasn't just the three-dimensional part, because I actually felt like a lot of the artistic background that I had was very beneficial in biomechanics, because there is so much art to it. There is so much three-dimensional wrapping your head around things. But the physics part was what I was missing, because my other background was more mathematics, physics, things like teach me something tangible that I can understand. And it just felt like there was this gap between the art and the science that I wasn't able to bridge. And the fact that you have continued throughout your career, I think you've got 4 books that you were the primary author, and multiple books outside of that, over 28 peer-reviewed publications, of continuing to ask those questions and not just be like, oh, look, I did a thing and I'm going to publish it and that's all I'm going to talk about for my rest of my life, but continuing to kind of push those questions and ask those questions in both surgical biomechanics as well as orthotic biomechanics, that you're not just fielding one aspect, you're really blending all of the function of the foot. I just think that that is so important. And you've made all of this publicly available. It's free. People can access it. They just need to know how to find it. Can you talk a little bit, as you, funny that you mentioned the thing about the internet. I literally said to Dr. Violin today about, can I get a textbook from the library to take into class? And she was like, they have digital textbooks. Like, oh yeah, of course they would have it. Like they can look it up on their iPads, right? So anyway, so I can appreciate the library comment. As you have watched digital technology take off, have you found, because you have now lectured internationally, a lot of your books are published in multiple languages, spreading kind of this idea, these concepts. Have you found access to information? Has there been a takeoff in the adoption of some of these theories as the internet has become more popular, or maybe that these concepts have been easier for people to access? What's your kind of experience been with digital technology and sharing ideas?
That's a lot of stuff, Joe. Well, let me go back a little bit. So one other important thing that happened early on in my career is there is an orthotic lab in Lodi called Precision Intercast, and I had met the owner while I was a resident, a biomechanics fellow, and when I had used their orthotic lab, and Paul Rasmussen, and Paul, I said, Paul, I would love to try to write a newsletter. I think it could help you and me. You could pay me to write the newsletter every month. It'd be good for your clients who use your lab to understand orthotics better and biomechanics better. And he said, oh, that's a great idea. Let's do it. So that, I did that. It was actually 5 books. First, it was just going to be a monthly newsletter. Then after 10 years of doing them, we said, this needs to be compiled into a book that other people can buy who just aren't the lab users of the lab. So we did the first book, which was 10 was a 10-year compilation. And then there's been 4 books since. There's actually 4 because Precision went out of business a year and a half ago. So I've actually got another 4 years that hasn't been published. So we did newsletters from 1986 until just a couple of years ago. So that's a few years. anyway, so that was really helpful too, because that I was forced again to come up with actually write about things, doing research on the research papers, talk about different things like treating sesamoiditis or posterior tibial tendonitis with orthotics and using things like the medial heel skive and that sort of thing. So that was, and then what happened was we have had those books. All 5 of the books were translated in Spanish and sold in the Spanish-speaking countries. And so that was, early on, I was doing it. It was just beginnings of the internet, so there wasn't a lot of these things available. But your question about the internet, that's been a great boon for not only understanding the written word, but having the availability of doing videos, 3D animations and such to teach biomechanics. And so I have 2 Facebook pages. One's personal, but one's a professional one where all I do is discuss biomechanics concepts and teach. And so I have 40,000 followers, and I don't know, probably like 30 different countries who, follow this and I try to hit things that are important from podiatric biomechanics and sports medicine type stuff. So that's been right now the way I teach. I wanted to make it free because I could probably have taken the time to try to make it something you have to pay, but I always felt that just like the medial heel skive, I didn't want to try to patent that because I got plenty of money from being a private practitioner. I wanted to have my ideas be used by people all over the world to help other people. It's what it's all about, being a podiatrist, trying to help people. And you don't really you help yourself if you're putting your name on something and you charge for it. Whereas if you just put it out there for other people to use at no charge and just, then to me, that's what this is all about, being a healer and being a podiatrist who can help people, not just in your own community, but around your country and in other parts of the world.
Can you
Well said.
Can you share some of your adventures around the world? I have a hard time keeping up with your travels, Kevin.
Well, I just counted recently. I was telling my wife, I said, I've done 51 international lectures. Yeah, as of being in Manchester last June. So I think I've lectured in UK 11 or 12 times, Australia 4 times, New Zealand 3 times, China once, Belgium 2 or 3 times, Canada a number of times, Spain 4 times. Yeah, so typically what I do early on when our kids were young, I may have to go by myself because couldn't get a babysitter, but luckily we had my wife's parents close by. So many of the early trips I took with my wife, Pam, we would go and just leave the kids when they were young with the grandparents, and we would go. Generally, you do 2 or 3 day seminar, then we'd take about a week of a vacation in area that we hadn't been to. So we've gotten to see some amazing things, and it's my wife loves it because she doesn't have to work. I'm the one doing the work, so I just so I used to stress about the lectures, and now I don't stress because I've done it so much. But yeah, so that's been really now people say, oh, you've done all this. When I had started out, if you had told me when I was going into private practice, struggling to make ends meet for my family, if you had told me that I would have lectured internationally 51 times, I wouldn't have believed you. I mean, it was never really wasn't my goal. My goal was had a desire to learn how the foot worked and to teach people so they could make their patients better. And I just had that desire to knowing how something works. And then I say, hey, I'm pretty good at this. Then you start getting lecture invitations, and then you write it. And then I started writing papers like the medial heel skive and the subtalar axial location. Then I started doing a lot of work on theory, on trying to understand how these ideas can be used to understand how the foot functions. And when I started publishing at a young age, and that's when I started getting the international invitations, you know, I think, oh, Kirby, oh, yeah, I read his paper in JATMA, you know, and, you know, we should get him out here. And my first lecture was New Zealand in 1991. It was me and O.A. Mercado and Jeff Stone, who used to be in practice. And so I lectured on biomechanics, Jeff Stone lectured on practice management, and Mercado lectured on surgery. And, you know, but those two have already, they've passed on, rest in peace, those guys. But that was, just to tell you, that was in 91. So that was over 30 years ago. The New Zealand guys, we had a big dinner, and we got to meet the former prime minister of New Zealand. He was sat like two down from us. And, you know, it's like he knew Ronald Reagan, he knew Nixon, he just knew all these presidents you know, you're blown away. Gosh, I just shook hands with the prime minister, you know, and here I'm just podiatrist lecturing on foot biomechanics. But yeah, so we have, and when you do those trips, we always have, you know, I could go on for a half hour just on stories from that, some of the things that happened, and getting to have some laughs with Jeff Stone and Mercado. So yeah, it has been a feather in my cap to be able to do that. We've had some nice vacations, you know, and I enjoy teaching. It's nice to be recognized as an expert. And, you know, of course, back then, Joe, I want to tell you this. You're a youngster. When I did these first lectures, do you think I had PowerPoint? No.
Slides.
Think I had, yeah. So when we were what we had to do back in 91 is I went to New Zealand carrying a duffel bag with 4 slide trays. Because if you really were good, you'd have 2 slide projectors going at the same time. So I would load up all my slides before I went there. I would get there and have one being backwards. I loaded it up before, and then I would carry a whole extra package of slides that I would carry with me so I could do my lectures from there. And you didn't have it if you wanted to do a title slide, it was, you know, you'd have to pay, you know, $7 or $8 for one slide just to have someone do it, or do it yourself with, you know, the reversal film and taking little gels and sticking them on the back. And so when you start to, I'm sure you've never had to do that, Joe.
No, but I have interacted with a slide deck. My dad had pictures of a trip that he took to India, and they were all in slides. So I am familiar with what is it, upside down and backwards. Yeah. But I have not personally had to lecture
Yeah,
off.
so those early lectures were, I mean, it was so different because you had slide projectors. It wasn't, and you couldn't show a video. But so I've grown up with the technology. I've always been fairly technically savvy and trying to stay up on things. So, you know, and then we finally got to PowerPoint, and, you know, you got the different slide LCD projectors starting to get better, where you could actually have really nice images being projected on a screen. So yeah, but those early lectures, those first couple, well, just anytime I did a lecture back in the 90s, it was basically on slides. You know, we dual competing slide projectors. You'd have 2 clickers, one on each hand, to do one and the other.
You know, Kevin, back when they had Super Seminar in Las Vegas, as a student, I was the audio visual guy, and I would set up those carousels for Dr. Gerbert and Dr. Burns and, you know, all the docs that were lecturing, and I would just pray they'd work, because if they got mixed up, it was all hell broke loose, you know. So.
Yeah, well, you know, now instead of having 4 slide trays, I have this little chip, you know, that's about that big. I put in my pocket and go through security with that, and, you know, we'll be sitting in a lecture, listening to one of my buddies lecture, and he'll say something that then I'll you know, take my laptop out and change my lecture for the next lecture within, you know, 5 minutes. So, you know, just incredible. The technology now allows you to just edit these PowerPoint presentations on the fly, which is, you know, a huge advantage when you're trying to give timely and informative lectures.
Absolutely. If you don't mind, I just wanted to share a quick story of when I first met you. It wasn't at the school. In like 1990, Stephen Bardis and I were classmates, and we were going up to run the American River 50-mile race. And we had seen in the biomechanics department your boards with all the, different shoes and orthotics stuck on them, and
the casting
casting
areas. Yeah,
techniques.
that during my biomechanics fellowship.
So you were well known to all of us, Kevin, even though you're only 28 years old. And so when we were going up to Sacramento, Steve said, "Hey, let's stop by and see Dr. Kirby," because he said you were very influential in his decision to go into podiatry. So I'm like, right on. But just to give you an idea, Kevin, when we stopped at your house, your two boys that are now 41 and 38,
36, yeah.
They were both little guys. And I remember like it was yesterday. And then as I told you before, when we left, we both looked at each other and said, "Yep, we're going to be like Dr. Kirby someday."
You poor people.
I know, it was great. Hey, can you share some great stories about your class at CCPM? The centipede stories, the running stories, because we tried to mimic a lot of the things you did 5 years after you were doing it.
Yeah, so we had a number of really high quality runners in our class. So that was the first thing. Steve Palladino and I had run together at UC Davis. He had run a 2:16 marathon and at the Boston that year, and I had run a 2:31. But so we had us two, the Davis guys, and Dave Leahy, Paul Resignado, Matt Fettig. We had a Dave Hannaford. We were all, 5 of us had run the Boston Marathon. So that was significant. We had 100, started out with 132, ended up with 106 when we were graduating in 83. So we had, Steve and Dave Leahy, and we were talking, we need to have a running club. So yeah, one of the funny stories is someone said, "Oh, hey, we'll be the pod squad." Oh yeah, that's a great idea. So, I kind of took over as president. I was kind of but we would always talk, me and Steve and Dave, all the guys who are the better runners who are really into it and have been competitive. We would get together and say, "Okay, how can we do this?" And so I don't know if you remember outside classroom A, there was a big bulletin board and it was all occupied by stuff. And I was thinking, well, maybe I should go and ask the administration if I can use this half of the board. I said, well, if I ask, they're going to say I can't do it. So I just took everything down off of one half of that board late after everyone had left, and I put Pod Squad Running Club News. And so that was, I usurped half of the bulletin board for Pod Squad stuff. And we had parties, and we would talk about races coming up, and no one's ever said anything a bit about it. We just we took over that board, and it was huge because we had not only we probably had 40 or 50 members right away because that was such a cool idea. Then we got the idea, hey, let's do some t-shirts. And so I designed the logo for the Pod Squad t-shirt, and we sold them. And we made a lot of money on that. We were selling them for, at the time it probably cost us $12 or $15 to produce, but we sold for like 25 or something like that. So we made some money for our parties and stuff. So and then I had, when I was at Davis, I can go, yeah, I can talk. So at UC Davis, just give you a little background there. I had been a fairly good runner in high school, but I wasn't varsity quality material at UC Davis. But when I went there, I was with all these crazy Aggie guys who were some of the best runners in Northern California, and they were wild. I mean, we would have some great parties. We would have toga parties with the women's cross country and track teams where I call it a pizza potluck party. So I would make the crust and the sauce, and I'd say, okay, you come bring a topping, and this is right after Animal House had come out, right? With the toga party and Animal House. So we said, let's go ahead and have a toga party, but you can't come in unless you bring a sheet and put a toga on. So you had to have a topping and a toga. So we would have a keg of beer, and we make pizzas for everybody and dance, just good, clean fun for a bunch of college runners, the men's and women's cross country team. So one year, though, we decided, after seeing what was happening to the Beta Breakers, we decided, hey, we should, they had all sorts of costumes running the Beta Breakers. There was not a long drive. That was only like an hour and a half drive from Davis. And said, hey, let's do the Beta Breakers. Let's do something that no one's done before. And so me and a couple of other guys on the team, we were going for a run one day. He says, "Hey, let's connect each other. Let's tie a rope and we'll be like a centipede or something like that." And then one of the guys, Doug Peck, who's now a professional photographer, he said, "Oh yeah, that's a great idea." So he went and got another guy going, and so we all showed up at Hickey Gym, and someone bought some plastic and polyethylene sheeting, and we rolled it out. We cut head holes and armholes, and that was 13. We only had 13 guys, so we made 13 holes, and then we tried running in it. And someone got some baling wire and styrofoam balls. We had little antlers on our heads, and we ran the first. That was the very first time the centipede was ever run. That was in 1978. So that was my junior year at Davis, and we got to the start, but we couldn't obviously be at the starting line. So we were about 2 blocks ahead. We started rolling out the centipede. We put on our antlers. We got into the thing, and people are looking at us, says, what the heck are you?" "A centipede, of course." And we were all, as collegiate athletes. We could have, some of the guys could have been in the top 10 of this race, but you can only go as fast as Sky and centipede, right? So yeah, we got together and we ran the very first centipede, and ever since then, it's been an annual event. The next year we did it. It was we challenged the West Valley Track Club to a World Centipede Championships. So that's still going on with the Aggie Running Club. So that was my junior and senior year. I ran in the first 2 centipedes with UC Davis, and when I got to podiatry school, I said, "Hey, let's do something different. We can do a bigger one. We got enough people, so we're gonna do not just a 50-foot centipede. Let's do a 150-foot centipede." So I got 150 feet of polyethylene sheeting, and we cut 39 holes, and we didn't have enough students. So when we got to the race, we grabbed people from the race and, hey, you want to run with us? You can be part of the world's largest centipede.
Oh my God.
And that was our very first, and Ron Valmassi and Rich Blake were in it. And Ron Valmassi, because we would run and then we'd do turns we'd call Lanichis, and we'd circle around other runners and go. And Ron Valmassi said, "Kevin, we did not run 6.2 miles. That was like a 10-mile run with all the weaving you did in it." he said that he never run that so far, and something so far that should have been a lot shorter. So but
Well, you started.
that was the type of stuff we did. And we did the centipede that one year, freshman year, and we did the t-shirts. And of course, as we got further along, we're all getting more serious and couldn't be the Motley. We were called the Motley Crew by our teachers, because I'd come back from a run at noon and I'd be sweating and have my t-shirt and running shorts on, dissecting the cadaver and something like that.
Well,
yeah,
we tried to live up to your tradition, and we had a big banner that said California College of Podiatric Medicine, and it had 7 or 8 poles, and we did our best to replicate what you were doing. We did it 4 years in a row, and we had scrubs on, and we'd have shoe covers on, and we'd wear like a head surgical head cover and
cool.
Masks. And
did you guys do a centipede too?
Yeah, they were like, only we didn't cut heads out of the sheets, but we ran together with holding these sticks, and we would rotate.
Okay.
Because we didn't that probably, we just kept rotating and giving everybody a break. And then we actually, back then, they started wearing those little ultra marathoning water bottle belts, and we didn't have, but we didn't have water bottles in the belt. We had like beers on the Sunday morning.
You bad boy.
I mean, we learned from the best, right? You guys.
Only in your 20s, right?
Only in your 20s, yeah.
What a beautiful age.
Oh gosh. Kevin, what a fun discussion, both technically, scientifically, and just about the profession. Thank you for all you've done. What an incredible contribution to podiatric medicine.
I appreciate it. Yeah, it's been fun. I'm still going. I'm still writing. Now I'm writing newsletters for ProLab that are, luckily they're published so everyone can read them now. So that's nice. And, I'm headed off to Brazil next month for my first South American lecture. So that'll be interesting to see how being translated into Portuguese works. Yeah, but it's nice to be recognized. I'm starting to wind down a little bit. I don't want to work as hard. So, I'm 67, so hoping to slow down over the next few years, but I'll still stay. I'll probably won't be practicing as much, but I'll still try to be active in teaching and lecturing, and yeah, it's fun to put stuff on my Facebook page, and I appreciate you guys inviting me to share my experiences. Hopefully, it'll motivate some of the younger podiatrists to take up the mantle of teaching and learning more about biomechanics so that they can make their patients happier and healthier.
Absolutely.
If it's okay, we can put a link to the Facebook page that has all your professional resources, if you would be open to that.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it'd be
Yeah,
easy for people to find
it's
it.
just a space. So yeah, you can just, it's under Kevin A. Kirby DPM. So yeah, it's just yeah, link that. That's there for, I think let's see how many. I think I have. Is it 19? I said 40,000. I can't remember. Oh, maybe it's 19,000 followers. But it's a huge number. I don't know hardly any of these people, but they, a lot of our students in other countries. Here in the United States, biomechanics is not as such a big deal, not as much interest, but in other countries, it's really big. And that's one of the reasons I enjoy lecturing overseas, is that there's a lot of interest in it, and they're fairly sophisticated, a lot of them. So, that's nice to be able to lecture to groups that are really interested in what you lecture in.
Well, if you and Pam want to come down to Phoenix, Arizona, we'd love to put you up and give a talk to our students, because they're very passionate about biomechanics too, Kevin.
Yeah, it's just not in the middle of the summer.
Not in the middle of the summer. No, like March or November or something.
Yeah, do it when you guys are, it's not, you can't cook an egg on the street.
Sounds good. Joe, any last words on your end?
No, thank you so much, Kevin, for your time and for your entire career's worth of work that you've done to advance our profession and help struggling students like myself understand the function of the foot.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you guys inviting me to be on your show, and I've seen your other shows, and you guys do a great job. So good job, you guys.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
And thank you also to all of our listeners on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We appreciate you tuning in every week. And to all of our viewers on YouTube, please become a subscriber if you get a chance. And Kevin, we're going to send you one of these Dean's Chat cups.
All right.
I don't know what your beverage of choice is, but it'll work for sure.
Coffee in the morning and afternoon. Got to have the coffee.
Perfect. All right. Well, until next week, everybody. Cheers.
Cheers.
All right. See you guys later. Bye-bye.
Thanks.